Well, I love the kind of talk that we're having today, and hopefully this is not a topic for us. This is more culture building, and what I mean is when we say things like loving the city and loving the people of the city, it's not a project. It's not a task to endeavor. It's not like, yeah, let's get our taxes done, or we need to go to the dentist, or I'm gonna join a gym because, I've put on some winter weight and I've gotten used to my stretchy pants, but I know I need to go to the gym because swimsuit weather is coming, and I felt so guilty because I've been pounding the double stuff for, all of winter, and so now, I'm going to go to the gym. I just want you to know, no, listen, we are not motivated by guilt around here. We're motivated by the grace of God. We're inspired by the sovereign hand of God, knowing that He has put us in this city, and the primary reason I would contend that He's put us in the city is for the people of the city. He's put you in the city for a person or for a family or for a people group, and how that should land on us is it just means that there's no person that is out of bounds. There's no person that is unreachable. There's no family that is too broken or poor or isolated or even self-sufficient that it's not a privilege for you and I to love and to serve them. And so all of a sudden, hopefully, the gospel message becomes really clear, more clear, where we go, okay, Jesus is seated on a throne. He is perfect, He's holy, He's beautiful, He is eternally worshiped, and yet at the very same time, we know He steps off the throne, He clothes Himself with flesh, right? He comes down to earth, He clothes Himself with the stink of humanity, and the reason He does that is to serve and to be a ransom for many. He serves and He saves, and then all of a sudden, hopefully, where the clarity comes from is we go, wow, I'm in the family business. Now, clearly, nobody in the room today is saving anybody. There's no redemptive action in our life that is moving towards somebody getting saved. Only Jesus saves people, but you and I can serve people and love people, hopefully by the power of the Holy Spirit, so that their eyes might be open to see that God sees them and longs to save them. Or to say this even in a different way, sometimes to really know how good the good news is, and it's pretty good, you got to know how bad the bad news is, right? And the bad news is pretty bad. And the bad news for everybody in the room, the bad news for everybody on the planet, in fact, is that every person falls under the condemnation of the Creator. And the reason is because of His perfect character. He's obligated to pour out wrath on sin. He has to do that. But because He's also perfectly loving, He makes a way for us. He sends His Son. His Son lays down His life for us on a cross. And when our faith is tethered to that, we're put squarely in a family. We're made sons and daughters of God. That's called extravagant grace, by the way. It's a grace that costs something. It doesn't cost us anything. It costs Him everything. And when someone has an encounter with that kind of grace, with that kind of love, it transforms them. It changes their life. It sets them on a trajectory. Hopefully what they see is that the God of the universe is not far away. The God of the universe draws near, and He opens up our hearts, and He removes our hearts of stone, and He puts in a heart of flesh. He makes us have a heart that is tender to respond to Him. And that's really what we're holding on to today, what we held on to last week, and we're in Matthew 9 today, if you've got a copy of the scripture. And if you're new to the Bible or new to church, Matthew's in the New Testament, which is like the second half of the Bible. Starts with the Old Testament, you got the New Testament. Matthew is one of the four Gospels, which is the eyewitness testimonies of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. We're in Matthew's Gospel. I love this story so much. And it's not really a story, it's an account, meaning it happened. And it's still happening. Matthew chapter 9, this is what we're reading. As Jesus went on from there, He saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Okay, let me pause here just for a second, talk about tax collectors because it sort of makes the story. So in Rome, and I know some of you know, Rome, they were ruling the known world at that time. They ruled actually for 1,400 years from England to India. And when they would conquer a land, conquer a people, they would sell the right to tax. So, for example, if you're living in Palestine, which is where this is taking place, if you live in Palestine, you happen to be a Roman citizen, you could basically buy a really evil version of an H&R Block, right? You could buy the right to tax your own people, right? And so you would buy the right to tax, and Rome is taxing everything, right? So it kind of sounds familiar, but they're really taxing everything. They're like, we're taxing the bread, we're taxing the juice, we're taxing the wine, we're taxing how many kids you've got, we're taxing fishing, we're taxing the roads, we're taxing everything. And a tax collector or a tax assessor, what they would do is they would put this massive surcharge on top of that, and so the tax collectors, they were getting filthy rich doing it. And because of that, or in part, they're the most hated people on the planet. And this is not an overstatement. In Israel in particular, they were the most hated, traitorous people in all of Jewish culture. It's not an overstatement. And the reason is because you're a citizen of Israel, and you throw your hat in with the occupying force. And so you can imagine when Matthew sets up his tax collector booth at a crossroads, Roman soldiers behind him, and, imposing this force, and the Jews would go up to pay their taxes, they're just reminded that they're a conquered people. They're reminded that they don't have their own economy. They don't have any kind of freedom. They're reminded that this guy is a traitor, and he's collecting money to resource the occupiers, to resource the people so that they can continue to rape and pillage and murder the people that you love. And so they hate the tax collectors. So much so, if you're a murderer, if you beat your own children, if you steal from the blind, you're still going to look down on the tax collector. They're the worst. So I just want you to know that. And Jesus, he's walking up to this guy's booth, this tax collector's booth, a guy named Jewish, an ethnic Jew, a traitor to the people. And Jesus looks right into his heart. And he says these words that some of you are familiar with. He says, "Follow me." These unlikely, extravagant words, "Follow me." And you can imagine Peter, one of the disciples, he probably has a conniption. He's just like, okay, wait a minute. What is happening here? Jesus, you probably don't understand who this guy is. You're not aware of what he's doing. And Jesus is like, I'm a Jew. I know exactly who this guy is. I know exactly what he's doing. And isn't it amazing? I just invited this guy to be part of our group. And Peter is like, no, that's not amazing. Because me and my brother, we just left a pretty awesome business, a family fishing business, and we had a future. We had a 401k, and if our dad finds out that this guy is going to be part of our group, he's going to kill us. And so Jesus, at the very least, before you ever invite this guy to do something with us or anything or nothing, I don't know what you're doing, before you do any of that, would you at least just tell him he's wrong? Would you tell him he's a traitor? Like, he's not accidentally sinning, right? Which nobody does. He's on purpose sinning. And so Jesus, maybe, would you just tell him, maybe, just if you could, if you've got it in you, would you just maybe think twice before you invite this guy into our group, into this thing that we're trying to build? And if there was a soundtrack to this story, this is really where the soundtrack would shift. Because Jesus looks at Matthew, and he's like, I've only got one thing to say to you. I've only got one invitation for you. And he's like, I just want you to follow me. It's very serious. Follow me. Like, wherever I go, wherever I lead you, I want you to follow me. Now, notice what he doesn't say. He's not like, hey, follow me, but also on the front end, I need to make sure you change a bunch of things. He's not asking him to clean up his act. He's not asking him to modify his behavior. He's like, hey, we'll deal with that stuff later. He's like, I just want you to follow me. Follow me wherever I go. And what I want you to hold on to is there's this massive kingdom reality that's kind of offensive to our religious sensibilities. And the kingdom reality is that one of our primary roles as the people of God is simply to put on display how good, how gracious, how extravagant God is. And we do that with our life, we do that with our money, we do that with our words, we do that with our how we live our life. We do all of it. We put on display how good, how gracious, how extravagant he is. And then we leave the results up to God. We leave life transformation up to God. We leave the behavior change up to God because he's the one carrying the grace of God. He's the one in charge of transforming, changing, making hearts tender. That's not our job. Our job is simply to put on display with our life and language how good and gracious and extravagant he is. Now, the reason I mention this is sort of a rub for some of us is because we tend to think that it is our job to front load the gospel message with all the bad news. Like we think it is our job to be like, if I ever share the gospel, which statistically, Christians in America, it's something like 91% of Christians in America will never share the gospel in their entire Christian life. Okay, that's another conversation for another day. But if you ever have the courage and there's a door open and you're like, I'm going to tell my story. Jesus saved me. I was blind, now I see. I was lost, now I'm found. If there is a moment where Jesus finds his way onto our lips, we tend to front load it by trying to convince people what dirty, rotten sinners that they are. Like you are broken and fractured and you have hurt so many people. You have disappointed God. You are in a dark place. Can I just get you a little secret here that I think everybody already knows? And this is, at least in my limited experience, nobody has got to be convinced what a disappointment they are. At least anybody that's honest, right? Nobody's got to be convinced like, hey, you're really inconsistent. You're broken. You're fractured. You have hurt lots and lots and lots of people. There are bodies in the wake of your life you don't even know about. Nobody's got to be convinced about that. Most people that I know, non-Christians, are like, yeah, guilty. I'm in a pit, I'm broken, I'm fractured, I don't know my way out, but this is my lot in life. What most people do not know, however, is that the God of the universe has drawn near and he loves them extravagantly. He's made a way for them to bring them out of the pit and lead them into a place of flourishing in which the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus is the center. They don't know that. My point is Jesus could have absolutely gone to Matthew at the tax collector's booth and been like, hey, Matthew, you're a traitor. You're the worst. You have wasted your life. And Jesus actually would have been right to do that. There's not anybody on the planet at that time that would have been right to do that, but Jesus, being perfectly holy, sinless, he actually would have been right to do that. But Jesus, how many of you know Jesus did not come to be right? Jesus came to serve. He came to be a ransom for many. He came to seek and to save those that were lost. He came to build a bridge. And so we find ourselves in that seat, watching Matthew respond to this invitation. And what do you think Matthew does? Matthew, you see at the end of verse 9, Matthew got up and followed him. And this is such a powerful truth for me on many levels. But it's the truth that if some of you are new to places like this, and you're like, I'm not even sure what to do. I'm not sure what to do with my hands. I'm not sure what to do with my emotions. I talk to people fairly regularly that sit through a worship time like this, and they're like, I cried all the way through it. Why did I cry? What's going on? Why? And it's a good reminder for me, like no matter what your story is, no matter what your baggage is today, I mean, literally, and I'm not trying to minimize your story, but no matter what you've gone through, no matter what you've done, no matter what has been done to you, like it doesn't really matter how many abortions you've had. It doesn't matter how many sexual partners you've had. It doesn't matter how many times you've been married. The invitation to Matthew, the unlikely, extravagant invitation, is still the same to you. I'm not minimizing the sin. I'm not minimizing the story because we've all come into this house with some scars today. But that's what makes the invitation so extravagant. And so Matthew, he responds to that. He gets up, he follows him, not really knowing what's coming. And then this is the verse that, if I haven't offended you, or if Jesus hasn't offended you, he's about to. I love this because it says, and while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, okay? And the reason that's offensive is because most of us, if we're honest, if you're a Christian, we're like, I mean, it's okay for me to talk to sinners. It's okay for me to, have a gospel conversation with somebody outside the faith, or somebody that's in a weird sexual relationship, or, an alternate lifestyle. Like, I'm going to have conversation, but to eat with them? No, I'm not going to do that. Like, that's off the table. And I guess, Jesus didn't understand the rules, because it says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house. Now, what's cool, by the way, is that Luke, one of the other gospel writers, he records the same instance, but he expands it a little bit. And he's like, it wasn't just Jesus having dinner with Matthew. Matthew actually threw a party with Jesus, which is how you know Matthew, his heart is changing. His heart is getting transformed. And who comes to, just a little Sunday school action, who comes to a tax collector's party? Nobody but tax collectors, right? People are like, oh yeah, I love tax collectors. No, remember, they're traitors. They're the worst. They're the most hated. And so who comes to tax collectors' parties? The other tax collectors. They're like, yeah, we love his parties. They're ragers. I mean, I love the first half of the party. Don't usually remember the second half of the party. Been told they're pretty amazing. And so yes, we're going to Matthew's party. And so there they are. The tax collectors, Matthew, Jesus, and the disciples. And again, you can imagine the disciples are like, this is not the strategy that we want to employ. We're building something here, right? We're trying to gain a reputation for kingdom people. And Jesus, you're the centerpiece. This is the wrong place. Like Matthew, he's dirty. He's so unclean, in fact, in Jewish law, that he wasn't even allowed to be in the outer courts of the temple. And they're like, and we're in his house. And so, like, we're going to catch some of his sin or something like that, right? But look what happens. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners, these are the other like untouchables. These would be hookers. These would be people with some kind of skin condition. These are people that like are on the outside looking in. The tax collectors and sinners, they came and they ate with him and the disciples. Now again, these are not accidental sinners. And again, there's no such thing, but we'll just use that language. These are on purpose sinners. These are people that like, I know what I'm doing. Especially in that culture, there was a very clear like right and wrong. Like here, of course, like I know up from down. I know there is a God of the universe. I know there's some things that he expects of me. And I know that I'm probably headed to hell. Like, I know that. And they're like, this is our life. This is what we're doing. This is where there's no other option for us. So they know that. They're on purpose sinners. And here's the thing that I've been living into all week and sort of pushing and pulling against it is that, number one, this is so powerful. Like, Jesus likes these people. Are you catching this? Jesus does not put up with them. They are not projects to them. He does not pity them. He actually sees them and he's like, they're amazing people. They're made in the image of God. They are valuable to him. They are worthy of respect simply because they're humans. Because my Father made them. And so he's like, I like being around these people. Now, he's not engaging in sin, just so you know that. I mean, he's perfect from beginning to end. But he's like, I like these people. I like being around these people. I'm enjoying having a meal with these people. Sure, I may have some different values. I may see the world differently currently. But like, I like being around these people. I enjoy. I'm not ashamed to be around them. In fact, it's sort of why I'm here. But here's the thing that is mind-blowing to me is they actually liked being around him. I mean, some of you, if I can really push a couple of your buttons today, some of you really believe there's an us versus them. And it's like the way that you know you're really being a good Christian is to make sure that the us's are right and the thems are not right. And so like the way that you know that is if the thems don't like the us's. Right? Like the way you know, let me just be clear, the way that you know you're being a real Christian is if non-Christians don't like you. And some of you, mission accomplished. So like Jesus loved them, he liked being around them, and they were like, we like Jesus. We like being around. Like, so there should be some sort of transferable truth there, don't you think? I don't know anybody that does this kind of application thing, but I would just take a stab in the dark and just say, if that was true for Jesus, it feels like it should be true for Christians. It feels like it should be true for those of us who have the spirit of the resurrected Christ living inside of us, that non-Christians would be like, I kind of like being around non-Christian or around Christians. Like they're like truth tellers, and they're kind, and they're loving, and they see me and value me, and they're not judgy to me. Like, because they know they're not the judge. Like, Jesus is the judge, but they're also standing on truth. They're also like, but this is true. Like, there's a way to thread that needle and to say, listen, I'm not in charge of the universe, but I know who is in charge of the universe, and he is full of grace, and he is full of truth. And there's something attractive about Christians just letting that go and go, you know, I don't have to be the guy that convinces people that they're wrong. Most people already know that they're wrong. Most people already know they're walking in darkness, in places of disobedience, mistrust, fractured life. They already know that. What they don't know is that the grace of God is there to transform. The grace of God is there to bring a merit that they could not earn on their own. Verse 11, it says, when the Pharisees, okay, and let me stop, because if you're a Bible person or if you've read the Bible or you've grown up in church, the Pharisees are typically the antagonist in the story, right? I mean, is that true? I mean, would that be like most of you, the way you would read the Pharisees, you're like, okay, yeah, when I hear the Pharisees are coming, it's just like, it's Darth Vader music, right? It's like, how does that music go? Dun, 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 dun. It's like that's what you hear when you hear the Pharisees were coming. You're like, these are the bad guys. They have not always been the bad guys. They have an amazing history of being the good guys. But this is a different sermon, but it's amazing. Religion not tethered to the grace of God always makes you the bad guy. Having all the right answers with the wrong motives makes you the bad guy. So yeah, they're the bad guys here, but not really, because they're people. Jesus even was like, I love you. I love you enough to tell you the truth, but again, I'm going to keep going. It says, when the Pharisees saw this, okay, what are they seeing? They're seeing Jesus eat with the sinners. They're seeing Jesus eat with the tax collectors, and they're confused, and they're like, okay, we don't get this, because we thought, or at least what we're hearing, is that this guy is from God. And our understanding of religion is that good people, God people, always eat with good people. They don't eat with bad people, and yet he's eating with sinners. He's eating with tax collectors. And so if he's so holy, why is he hanging out with them? Which actually is a reasonable question, right? It's flipping what we know about religion on its head. And Jesus is like, I didn't come to build a religion. I came to extend relationship. And so keeps going. It says, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked the disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, and I just imagine this in my mind's eye. Jesus, he's at the table with all the tax collectors. Pharisees are sort of in the doorway because they're not coming in. They're like, if I come in and I hang out with unclean people, they're unclean for like 7 days. And they're like, can't afford that. And so they're sort of at the door on the outside looking in. And then Jesus at the table with all the disciples, or with the tax collectors and the sinners, and they're like, posing this question, like, why does your master eat with those guys? And Jesus overhears it. And Jesus says this, sort of at the table, in my mind, sort of looking back at the door, and here's what he says. He says, on hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Now, just laying this out, actually could have been really offensive to Matthew, don't you think? I mean, if Matthew heard that, and maybe he did hear it, I don't know. But I would imagine if Matthew did hear it, offense could have risen up in him, and he could have been like, wait a minute, time out, turn the music off. Did you just call me sick? Like, are you saying all my tax collector buddies? Like, I know we're not the best. We're probably the worst, but are you calling all of us sick? And what I love is that Jesus doesn't back off from that. Jesus isn't like, well, let me reframe this for you. He doesn't do that. I mean, his message is full of grace, but sometimes it's not palatable, and he doesn't back off from that. And so Jesus, is what he means by this is this. He's like, I'm just looking for people that know they're sick. I'm looking for people that know their condition. Like if you go to the cancer center, if you've ever been to the cancer center, nobody in there is walking in some sort of imagination. Like my dad right now has got stage 4 cancer, and he's like, this is it. This is how life works. There's a beginning, there's the end, and he knows it. And Jesus is like, that's who I'm looking for. I'm looking for people that know their condition. I'm not looking for pretenders. I'm not looking for religious people. He's like, I'm looking for people that go, I know where I am, and I know where I'd like to be, but I know I can't get there on my own. So I know it. I'm looking for people that know they're sick, because we're all terminal on our own. And he's like, but the doctor's in the house. And so he says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. And again, I think he's speaking again to the Pharisees. He quotes Hosea 6, one of my favorite chapters. He says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Meaning I'm more into redemption. I'm into rescue missions. That's what I'm into. And if Jesus had a mission statement, which I don't think he did, but if he had a mission statement, he got it put on a plaque on his office, I think this would be his mission statement. He says, for I have come not to call the righteous, but sinners. I've come not to call the righteous, but sinners. And here's what this means for us, is that he's extending an invitation to everybody in the room today. And the invitation, as unlikely and as extravagant as it was here, is the same. The invitation is not like clean up your act, get your stuff together. That's not the invitation. The invitation is follow me. And I'll do the heavy lifting of life change. I'll give you the new heart you long for. I'll give you new attitudes, new margins, new vision for your future. I'll take care of your sin problem. May not be able to deal with the consequences of this life, because sometimes our life choices just have consequences. But he's like, in terms of eternal consequences, your debt will be canceled. And you will be a new person with a new name and put in a new family. But the invitation is to follow me. When I was at Heritage House about a month ago, that's where I work a couple days a week, not making lattes, but I'm spending a couple days there just reading and writing and just getting my sermon stuff together. And so I'm there. And if you hang out somewhere long enough, you start recognizing people. And so there was this woman that was there. She kind of in and out. And so one day I'm at this table, I'm the same table, and I've got my books spread out, and I've got my MacBook, and I'm just going away at it. I've got my earbuds in. I'm not listening to anything, but it's my signal to say, don't come over here. So, but again, she doesn't know the religious rules. She doesn't, right? And so she walks over. She's like, hey, somebody told me you're a pastor. And I'm embarrassed. That's what I did. I was like, I don't know, maybe. What do you need? What do you need? It's literally what I did. Seriously, I'm ashamed of that. And she's like, I just need to talk to somebody. I don't have a pastor. Can I sit down? And I was like, yeah, come on. So she just starts unloading. She's like, listen, I am not a good person. She's like, I'm a bad person. And I don't go to church. And I was like, whoa, listen, not going to church does not make you a bad person, right? You guys know that? Yeah. Okay. And she's like, no, well, there's a story, and she's just kind of unloads. She's like, I've been neck deep in addiction for a decade. I've lost my children. I've lost my marriage. I've lost my job. I'm pretty sure God hates me. There's no way forward for me, and I was just hoping you had some answers for me. And seriously, she's talking, and I'm just praying. I'm like, I have no idea what to say to this woman. There's no silver bullet in moments like that, right? But what I did say, and I think it's just true for today, is I just said, you're in the perfect position to meet God today. Because you're so aware of where you live. You're so aware of your need. You're so aware of your desperation. And you're in the perfect place to have a grace explosion go off in your life. And I just know that to be true in places like this. I know we think, okay, this is a religious place, and places like Heritage House is a secular place, but all of it is ruled by the kingdom of God. All of it is a place where we can see the people of God put on display the grace of God so that those that are far away from God can become sons and daughters of God.